For millennia, the Indian Ocean has been more than a body of water. It has been a corridor of movement, a meeting ground of civilizations, and a catalyst for exchange. Long before the rise of European empires or the invention of the compass, communities along its shores understood its seasonal winds, mapped its currents, and built relationships across its vast expanse. From East Africa to Southeast Asia, from the Arabian Peninsula to the Indian subcontinent, the Indian Ocean connected people through shared commerce, culture, and purpose. This maritime world was not shaped by a single empire or ideology. It was formed by countless actors, sailors and merchants, rulers and artisans, scholars and pilgrims. Their journeys and negotiations formed one of the earliest and most enduring examples of globalization. The following chapters explore this history: how the ocean became a highway, how coastal cities grew into economic powerhouses, how states asserted control over its waters, and how European colonization disrupted and transformed this maritime system. Most importantly, we consider how the legacy of this ancient trade network continues to inform the modern world. Chapter 1: Monsoons and Maritime Memory: How the Ocean Became a Highway. The Indian Ocean has always been more than water and wind. It is one of humanity's oldest and most enduring highways, an expanse of sea that connected distant cultures long before modern maps named its coasts. For thousands of years, people crossed these waters not blindly, but with knowledge passed down through generations. Knowledge of stars, currents, birds, and the breath of the monsoon. Unlike the unpredictable storms of the Atlantic or the harsh chill of the northern seas, the Indian Ocean offered a seasonal rhythm. Every year, without fail, the monsoons arrived. These powerful seasonal winds, caused by the differential heating of land and sea, blew from the southwest in the summer and reversed to the northeast in the winter. Mariners learned to time their voyages to these winds, sailing eastward with one monsoon and returning home with the next. It was nature's clockwork, a system that made long-distance trade not only possible but dependable. This understanding of the monsoon was rooted not in books or instruments, but in lived experience. Long before the invention of the compass, sailors along the coasts of Arabia, India, and East Africa knew how to read the sea. They studied the stars, the behavior of birds, the smell of the wind, and the patterns of waves. Navigation was a practice of memory, often passed orally within families or guilds. These early mariners knew not just where they were going, but when to leave and how to return. As early as 2000 BCE, there is evidence of trade between the Indus Valley and Mesopotamia. Egyptian records mention ships arriving from a land called Punt, likely along the Horn of Africa. By the time of the Roman Empire, ships regularly sailed from Egyptian ports like Berenike and Myos Hormos to the western coast of India. The Roman geographer Pliny the Elder noted how mariners could now sail across the open ocean, no longer clinging to the coast, thanks to their understanding of the monsoon. What made the Indian Ocean so unique was its openness. Unlike the Mediterranean, hemmed in by land and dominated by empires, the Indian Ocean had no central authority. There were no permanent naval patrols, no dominant navy, just thousands of vessels, from small coastal craft to massive cargo ships, all following the same winds. It was a sea of shared knowledge rather than controlled territory. The vessels themselves evolved with the environment. Arab traders built ihaus with their characteristic lateen sails, ideal for catching variable winds. Indian and Southeast Asian shipwrights developed teakwood hulls that could endure long journeys. Some ships used stitched planks instead of nails to allow greater flexibility in rough seas. These were not crude rafts, but finely tuned machines built through centuries of experimentation. Some were capable of carrying hundreds of tons of cargo, evidence of just how advanced and ambitious these voyages could be. Trade followed these maritime paths. Spices, ivory, pearls, textiles, incense, and ceramics all moved across vast distances, along with stories, rituals, and religious beliefs. But in this early phase, trade was often personal. A single merchant might fund a voyage, join the crew, and negotiate deals at multiple ports. There was no bureaucracy, no customs paperwork, only relationships, trust, and reputation. Communities along the coasts adapted to meet this rhythm. Markets blossomed in anticipation of the monsoon's arrival. Port cities came alive with the sounds of different languages, the exchange of gifts and greetings, and the bustling movement of goods from ship to shore. Trade was a social event as much as an economic one. Even when distant empires became aware of this oceanic highway, they often struggled to dominate it. The sea did not belong to kings. It belonged to those who understood its pulse. Control over land did not automatically grant mastery of the water. This tension would echo through centuries of competition between coastal powers and landlocked empires. In this way, the Indian Ocean became not just a sea of trade, but a sea of memory. Its roots were encoded in the minds of sailors, its rhythms aligned with the turning of the year. The monsoon did not merely make trade possible, it made the Indian Ocean a stable, recurring stage on which civilizations met, shared, and grew. It created a maritime tradition unlike any other, where knowledge, rather than military force, was the most prized asset. In the next chapter, we'll follow these rhythms to the shores they touched, exploring how port cities became the nerve centers of this ancient network, where goods were traded, ideas exchanged, and worlds woven together. Chapter 2: Ports of Gold and Spice, the Rise of Coastal Cities. With the rhythms of the monsoon winds guiding them, ships made their way to the shores of bustling port cities, each a hub of commerce, culture, and convergence. These coastal centers were not only waypoints for trade, they were vibrant meeting places where languages mingled, religious ideas spread, and empires found their maritime pulse. From East Africa to Southeast Asia, a constellation of cities emerged as key nodes in the Indian Ocean network. In East Africa, Kilwa and Mogadishu grew wealthy on the export of gold, ivory, and enslaved people. Inland empires like Great Zimbabwe funneled their resources to these ports, which in turn linked Africa to Arabia, India, and beyond. The architecture of these cities' stone mosques, coral palaces, and public squares reflected the wealth that maritime commerce brought. Oral histories and archaeological remains alike testify to their cosmopolitan flair and regional dominance. Sailing east, traders would reach Arabian ports like Aden and Muscat. These cities acted as critical intermediaries, linking the Red Sea and Persian Gulf with the broader Indian Ocean. Here, incense, pearls, horses, and dates flowed outward, while spices, textiles, and precious stones flowed in. The markets of Aden were known for their sophistication, and merchants from Persia, India, and Ethiopia negotiated deals in their own tongues. These cities became diplomatic bridges as much as commercial hubs. The Indian subcontinent itself was home to legendary ports. Cambay, Kambat, on the western coast of India, became a thriving center for cotton textiles, gems, and indigo dye. Farther south, Calicut and Cochin drew spice traders from as far as China and Venice. These ports didn't simply import and export, they manufactured, stored, taxed, and innovated. Indian traders acted both as suppliers and as intermediaries, helping circulate goods from Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Some families built trading dynasties that endured across generations, forming tight-knit merchant communities with global connections. Further east, the Straits of Malacca became the narrow yet crucial channel through which ships passed between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Malacca itself rose to power by taxing this trade and facilitating peaceful commerce. The city, like many in the region, was a melting pot. Its rulers welcomed foreign traders and allowed diverse communities to flourish. Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and Confucians all found space to work and worship. Local elites even adapted architecture and cultural norms to accommodate incoming influences, crafting unique hybrid identities. These cities were not passive way stations. They were active agents in shaping maritime trade. They built harbors, stored goods, maintained diplomatic relationships, and issued contracts. Some minted their own currency or used weight-based systems of exchange. Many employed brokers, individuals who could speak multiple languages and mediate between trading parties. In these urban worlds, knowing how to navigate culture was as important as knowing how to navigate the sea. Socially, the port cities were remarkably cosmopolitan. Intermarriage between local populations and foreign traders was common. Mosques stood next to temples. Food, dress, and language reflected a tapestry of influences. These were cities built not on domination, but on exchange, where proximity to others bred tolerance, innovation, and sometimes rivalry. Artifacts like Chinese porcelain in East Africa or Gujarati cloth in Java reveal the extent of these cultural intertwinings. And yet, their prosperity was never guaranteed. Changes in monsoon patterns, piracy, political instability inland, or shifting trade routes could send a city into decline. Some ports, like Lothal in ancient Gujarat, were eventually abandoned. Others, like Zanzibar, evolved and endured into the modern age. The story of these ports is a reminder that trade, like the sea, is fluid. Still, their influence endured. These cities shaped the flow of goods and ideas for centuries, forming a vibrant web of exchange that stretched across continents. They were the beating hearts of the Indian Ocean trade system, places where gold and spice changed hands. But so too did stories, science, and songs. Their ruins and living communities continue to echo with the legacy of exchange, proving that cities on the sea often have longer memories than those on land. In the next chapter, we turn to the powers that sought to command this ocean network, not just to trade, but to rule. We'll explore how empires from the Cholas to the Sultanates tried to dominate the sea lanes and shape the commerce of a vast and restless ocean. Chapter 3: Empires Afloat, States that Sailed and Ruled the Waves. The Indian Ocean's openness invited trade, but it also sparked ambition. As port cities flourished and goods flowed freely across waters, powerful states and dynasties began to view maritime commerce not just as a source of wealth, but as something to be controlled. From the Chola dynasty in southern India to the Swahili city-states and Islamic sultanates along the coasts, rulers sought to project power across the sea. This chapter explores the empires that rose to dominate the ocean's lanes, not only through trade, but through fleets, alliances, and force. Among the first to assert naval power in the Indian Ocean was the Chola dynasty. At its height in the 11th century, this Tamil empire extended its influence across South India and Southeast Asia. The Cholas launched naval expeditions against the Srivijaya Empire in modern-day Indonesia, not to conquer territory in the traditional sense, but to control critical trade routes. Their advanced shipbuilding techniques and large-scale maritime campaigns showed how land-based empires could wield influence over sea trade when properly organized. The Srivijaya Empire, based in Sumatra, had long been a dominant maritime power in the region. Rather than expanding through conquest, Srivijaya controlled the narrow straits of Malacca and taxed ships passing through. Its capital, Palembang, was a Buddhist learning center as well as a commercial hub. By balancing diplomacy, religion, and economic policy, Srivijaya maintained soft power over a vast maritime domain for centuries. It was a model of maritime hegemony without direct imperial reach. Elsewhere, along the East African coast, the Swahili city-states developed a unique model of decentralized governance. Places like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Sofala were ruled by local elites who traced their ancestry to both African and Arab forebears. These city-states formed a cultural and commercial bridge between inland Africa and the broader Indian Ocean world. Though not empires in the traditional sense, they formed alliances and mutual protection pacts to ensure that trade could thrive and that their ports remained prosperous. In the Persian Gulf and Arabian Peninsula, Islamic sultanates, such as those based in Hormuz, Muscat, and later Zanzibar, demonstrated the political power of trade-linked governance. These states relied heavily on maritime commerce and naval defense, forging strong relationships with Indian and Southeast Asian ports. They built ships, armed convoys, and created diplomatic protocols to secure trade routes. Religion also played a role in unifying far-flung trading partners. Shared Islamic identity often underpinned trust between distant merchants. Control of the sea lanes was never uncontested. Competition for dominance often led to skirmishes and blockades. Piracy, sometimes state-sponsored, flourished along vulnerable routes. To maintain influence, maritime powers had to be agile. They adapted their naval technologies, rotated alliances, and sometimes offered favorable trade terms to foreign merchants to maintain their place in the pecking order. Unlike the Mediterranean, where empire often meant direct rule, in the Indian Ocean, control was more about access and relationships. Maritime diplomacy became a key tool of imperial strategy. Gifts, envoys, and emissaries sailed alongside goods. Rulers who could offer security and favorable markets attracted more traders. Some states even encouraged the settlement of foreign merchant communities to stimulate commerce and enhance their global connections. It was a form of soft imperialism, rule by invitation rather than imposition. Still, there were exceptions. The Chinese Ming dynasty, during the early 15th century, famously launched the Zheng He voyages. These massive fleets, led by Admiral Zheng He, reached as far as the Swahili coast, India, and the Arabian Peninsula. Though these expeditions were more about prestige and diplomacy than conquest, they demonstrated how a land empire could briefly assert significant maritime presence, before China voluntarily turned inward once more. In sum, the Indian Ocean was not a lawless expanse. It was a contested and negotiated space. Empires floated on its waves not by overwhelming force, but by understanding its rules. To rule the sea was not just to command ships, but to shape relationships, regulate flows, and read the political currents as carefully as the monsoon winds. In the next chapter, we'll examine how this delicate balance was disrupted by newcomers from the West. As European powers arrived with cannons and caravels, the Indian Ocean's decentralized world of maritime negotiation would be thrown into upheaval, forever altering its course. Chapter 4. Arrival of the Outsiders. Europeans enter the ocean. In the early 16th century, sails bearing unfamiliar flags began to appear on the horizons of the Indian Ocean. The arrival of European powers, first the Portuguese, then the Dutch, and later the English and French, disrupted a delicate maritime order that had for centuries been maintained through mutual negotiation, cultural exchange, and a respect for the rhythms of trade. These outsiders brought with them a different worldview, one where commerce was not about reciprocity, but about control. The first major European power to arrive was Portugal, under the command of explorers like Vasco da Gama. When da Gama reached Calicut in 1498, he entered a world already deeply connected by trade and diplomacy. But instead of joining it, the Portuguese sought to dominate it. Armed with cannon-bearing caravels and papal blessings, they rapidly moved to seize key choke points: Goa, Hormuz, and Malacca. These strategic ports allowed them to cut into existing routes and demand tribute from traders who once moved freely. The Portuguese did not merely want to participate in Indian Ocean trade, they wanted a monopoly. They established the cartaz system, a naval pass required for merchants to trade without harassment. Failure to produce a cartaz often meant the seizure of cargo or destruction of ships. Through this system of maritime taxation, backed by gunpowder, they disrupted centuries-old practices of free and open navigation. Resistance to this intrusion was swift and at times fierce. Local rulers and merchant communities pushed back, sometimes through direct naval conflict, sometimes by circumventing Portuguese routes altogether. Yet the firepower and aggressive strategy of the newcomers gave them a foothold. Unlike previous maritime powers, the Portuguese came not as merchants, but as militarized agents of empire. Their presence reshaped diplomacy, forced new alliances, and drove wedges between formerly cooperative trading powers. Following Portugal, the Dutch East India Company, VOC, introduced a more systematic form of corporate imperialism. Backed by shareholders and military force, the Dutch sought not just to tax trade, but to control production, especially of valuable spices in the Indonesian archipelago. They built forts, coerced local leaders, and sometimes destroyed entire harvests to maintain scarcity and drive up prices. Their grip on nutmeg, cloves, and mace marked the transformation of the Indian Ocean from a space of shared commerce to one of extracted profit. The VOC became one of the world's first multinational corporations, with the power to wage war and govern territories in pursuit of commercial dominance. The British East India Company entered later, but eventually eclipsed them all. While the company began as a commercial venture, it would evolve into a colonizing force, especially in India. Its early presence in Surat and Bombay laid the groundwork for broader imperial ambitions. Like the Dutch, the British combined trade, diplomacy, and military power, often leveraging rivalries among local powers to expand their reach. They transformed port cities into colonial outposts and gradually assumed control of inland regions as well. These cities were reshaped physically and politically to suit colonial priorities, altering architecture, education, and governance. This era marked a fundamental shift. Where Indian Ocean trade had once been multipolar, flexible, and largely cooperative, it now became increasingly centralized, hierarchical, and extractive. The European model of empire brought bureaucratic control, gunboat diplomacy, and new systems of taxation. Older merchant networks were sidelined, suppressed, or absorbed. Ports that once thrived on intercultural collaboration became garrisons of empire. But not all was lost. Local traders adapted. Some collaborated with Europeans. Others built alternative routes. Smuggling networks emerged to evade monopolies. In places like Zanzibar, Indian merchants regained influence, especially in the 19th century. Despite the upheaval, the spirit of maritime exchange never fully died. It adapted, resisted, and in many places endured. Memory, language, and customs continued to flow across the water, quietly subverting the rigid structures imposed by colonial regimes. The arrival of Europeans changed the Indian Ocean, but it did not erase it. Beneath the weight of colonial systems, older traditions of trade and connection persisted, waiting to re-emerge. Today, the legacy of those encounters of violence and fusion, resistance and accommodation, still shapes the cultural and economic identities of nations along the ocean's rim. In the final chapter, we explore the legacies of this great ocean network, how it shaped not only the ancient world, but continues to ripple through the modern one. Chapter 5: Currents That Never Ceased, The Legacy of a Maritime World. Though cannons echoed across once peaceful harbors and foreign flags were planted along coastlines, the story of the Indian Ocean trade network did not end with colonization. Its deeper rhythms, the monsoon winds, the cultural currents, and the human connections continued to flow beneath the surface of imperial structures. The Indian Ocean was never just a stage for empires. It was a crucible for enduring exchange, and its legacy still shapes the world today. One of the most lasting influences of this ancient network is the Bantu cultural blending that took place across its shores. Languages such as Swahili, enriched by Arabic, Persian, and Bantu roots, speak to centuries of contact. In India, Islamic and Hindu traditions intertwined with maritime rituals. In Southeast Asia, one finds Chinese temples beside Muslim mosques and Hindu shrines. Foodways, clothing, and artistic styles reveal how cultures once separated by vast distances became intimately connected. Religions too rode the waves. Islam spread across the ocean not through conquest, but through conversation, trade, and migration. The spread of Buddhism to Southeast Asia and of Hinduism to the Indonesian archipelago followed similar paths. These religions were adapted by local populations and often merged with indigenous beliefs, creating uniquely syncretic traditions that endure to this day. Economically, the trade routes established across the Indian Ocean laid the foundation for modern global commerce. Ports like Singapore, Mumbai, Mombasa, and Jakarta trace their commercial routes to this maritime heritage. Today's shipping lanes follow many of the same paths used by ancient sailors. Global supply chains moving oil, electronics, textiles, and food still pass through these waters, echoing the age-old movements of cinnamon, gold, and silk. Diasporas that formed during the height of the Indian Ocean trade remain influential. Indian, Arab, and Chinese communities established centuries ago in East Africa, the Persian Gulf, and Southeast Asia have maintained their identities while contributing to their host cultures. These communities have played vital roles in local economies, politics, and social life, acting as bridges between past and present. Yet the legacy is not only one of blending and continuity, it is also a story of awe, memory, and resilience. Many coastal communities remember the disruptions brought by European colonization, and the recovery from those disruptions continues. Post-colonial nations have had to reclaim narratives, rebuild trade autonomy, and reassert the value of indigenous knowledge systems that once guided sailors and traders. This reclamation often involves recentering maritime histories that were once overshadowed by land-based empires. Museums, academic programs, and local storytelling traditions are helping preserve and disseminate the deep-seated maritime knowledge that shaped generations. In this way, memory becomes a tool of empowerment, reconnecting people with their oceanic past. In recent decades, there has been renewed interest in the Indian Ocean as a geostrategic arena. Naval powers vie for influence over key routes. International trade agreements redraw the map. Maritime infrastructure projects, such as ports and logistics hubs, have become the focus of global competition. But behind these modern developments lies an ancient truth. The Indian Ocean was always more than a body of water. It was a medium of human connection. Its past remains a living force in the political, cultural, and economic stories of the 21st century. Perhaps most significantly, the Indian Ocean Network reminds us that globalization is not a modern invention. Long before the rise of modern capitalism, before container ships and fiber optic cables, communities around this ocean were already deeply entangled. They spoke in many tongues, prayed in many ways, and traded not just in goods, but in ideas, technologies, and dreams. The Indian Ocean was a teacher of tolerance, of timing, of trust. It rewarded those who understood nature's rhythm and respected human difference. Its legacy is not just in the spices we taste or the textiles we wear, but in the very idea that the world has always been connected, not by conquest alone, but by cooperation. As the waves continue to lap the shores of Africa, Arabia, India, and Asia, they carry the echoes of a time when empires rose and fell, but the ocean kept moving, linking lives, shaping histories, and weaving together a truly global story. In remembering the Indian Ocean, we remember ourselves not as isolated nations, but as threads in a shared human tapestry spun across salt water, centuries, and stars. The Indian Ocean Trade Network is a reminder that human history is often fluid-formed, as much by waves of contact as by lines on a map. Across centuries, the ocean's monsoons brought strangers together, helped cities rise, and shaped alliances that extended beyond borders or creeds. While the arrival of European powers restructured this maritime system, they did not extinguish its core. The relationships, knowledge systems, and rhythms of trade endured, and in many cases adapted to the challenges of modernity. Today, the Indian Ocean remains a vital artery in the global economy. and its shores continue to reflect the diversity forged by centuries of movement and exchange. To study this network is not only to understand how goods were traded, it is to grasp how societies were built, how ideas moved, and how people made sense of the world and each other. In remembering the Indian Ocean, we are reminded that history is rarely confined to land. It flows like water, shaping, connecting, and carrying us forward.